Hello, my name is Nicci Rossouw, and we're doing a series of talks with the Robotics Australia Group board. And today I'm introducing Dr. Sue Keay, who is a founding board member, and she's also the chair of Robotics Australia Group. Hi, Sue, welcome, and thank you for joining today.
Thank you, Nicci.
Tell us a little bit about Robotics Australia Group. Why did a Robotics Australia Group form, and what is it?
Robotics Australia Group formed as to be the voice for robotics in Australia. So we are the peak body representing the robotics industry in this country. And the reason that Robotics Australia Group was formed back in May 2020 was as a direct result of the robotics roadmap for Australia that a few of us worked on back and released in 2018. And part of that process of putting the roadmap together meant that we went out very widely and consulted with the robotics community here in Australia and tried to identify, well, first, what the capability in robotics in Australia actually was, how many companies in the robotics space, and by robotics, we use a very broad brush to describe that. So it's not just people who make robots, it's the people who make all of the components that go into robots, as well as the software that gives robots, many of their intelligent qualities, such as computer vision. So we tried to get an idea of how many of these companies existed in Australia and how many people they employed, what they were worth to the economy, because there was an appreciation that Australia was very good at producing robotics and producing people with talent in robotics, but not really a very clear idea of how that then translated into benefits to the country. So we thought we really needed to get a handle on that. And as we were doing that, we discovered that in general, the people who are using robotics, so some of the larger companies out there, gave us feedback that they felt that the robotics industry in Australia was quite immature, which is a fair call. I think a lot of our companies are quite young, that it was fragmented. And again, that's probably a fair call because a lot of these companies, and certainly when we embarked on the process of putting the roadmap together, people really weren't aware of these companies being in existence. And the final point that was made to us was that the robotics industry in Australia was invisible. So not many people actually, and I think this is true to this day, are aware that we actually make robots here in Australia. And that's something we should be really proud of. So we had a bit of a look around at what were the differences between the Australia and many other countries in terms of how we were promoting our robotics industry, and discovered that many other countries actually have associations that represent the robotics industry, and that helps to raise their profile. So we thought, okay, well, this sounds like the sort of thing that we need for Australia, and we formed to directly address those three challenging areas. So to address the area of immaturity, what we're trying to do is to help and advocate on behalf of robotics companies here in Australia so that they can grow and scale and become global businesses. In terms of the fragmentation, we're trying to pull the robotics community together, from the researchers who are, making a lot of advances around robotics technology, through to the people who are adopting robotics, as well as obviously the robotics and related technology manufacturers themselves. And just trying to make sure that the community understands who's who, and in particular, the people that they might want to collaborate with. And finally, in terms of visibility, we have tried to really just raise the profile of the types of robots that we are making in Australia and how they can have an impact on every sector of the Australian economy, because they do impact on every sector. And we're fortunate that most of Australia's robotics companies have an impact across all different sectors. So there's a lot to choose from, and to try and put a coherent message out there to people about the benefits that robotics can have on their lives or in their companies. We really felt it was necessary for us to put together this representative group that we call Robotics Australia Group.
You also were responsible for leading the 2020 roadmap, Robotics Australia roadmap, which of course was released in 22 because of COVID. What was the growth that you saw and comparison between the two roadmaps?
Well, we found that there was a lot more engagement. I think the production of that roadmap in 2018 really already raised the profile of robotics, and it meant that we got a lot more engagement with the process of putting together the second version of the roadmap. So I think during the first version of the roadmap, we had maybe 100 people who had participated in roundtables and workshops to put everything together, and it was over 1,000 by the time we put the second roadmap together. The case studies increased so much that I didn't actually even ask people to give us case studies, because they were just coming in pretty much of their own bat. And it really was pleasing to see what a big improvement there'd been. And although it is still not to the point that we would like to see it, there was also quite an improvement in the availability of venture capital reported by robotics companies in Australia, but still, unfortunately, nowhere near where we need it to be, which is one of the tasks of Robotics Australia Group, to try and make sure that we can encourage a funding environment that supports robotics companies to grow and develop here in Australia, and encourage them not to seek opportunities overseas.
So you mentioned it was important to establish the Robotics Australia Group. We have a very active board. I think we now, in end of July, we've between the 8 of us probably attended over 100 events and speaking opportunities. What is the value that you see in this for Robotics Australia in general?
Well, I think most people would agree that, since our formation, there really has been a step change in the visibility of robotics in Australia, to the point where the Department of Industry and the Australian government have announced that they want to release a national robotics strategy, and Robotics Australia Group are, a core part of making that happen and advising the department. And hopefully we will be able to see that strategy come out by the end of this year. The reason that that's so important is because we need to really paint a picture of what our vision is for robotics in Australia. And until we get to that point that government is on board, that the robotics community is on board, and that we're all pulling together to achieve the same end, then unfortunately, I think it's very hard to overcome some of the barriers that we've faced in the past, where people don't really have an incentive to collaborate. It's hard to get investment to grow their businesses. And in general, people just don't actually know that we do robotics in Australia. So I think, this strategy will be very important in tying all of that together. And all of those engagements that you mentioned are important for us to be able to get that word out, because until we start to do that, unfortunately, if everyone acts in isolation and doesn't work together, then it's very hard for us to build the profile of robotics here and really give people information about the opportunities that it will provide for their futures.
We, of course, have a membership model. And why do you think it's important for people to support Robotics Australia Group?
Well, I guess we are a startup in our own right. So we are just, starting to really build the value that we can give to the industry. But I think most robotics companies that have been around long enough to remember the time 3 years ago, before Robotics Australia Group existed, would have to reflect that the profile of the industry has certainly taken a big upswing thanks to our existence, and it really is a bit of a long game to really get the recognition that the robotics industry deserves, and the support and hopefully the investment that it needs so that we can build a sustainable robotics industry here. Then you need to have an organisation like Robotics Australia Group in existence. And I think that we wouldn't be able to achieve that if we weren't trying to pull the community together and speak with, a united voice on many of the issues that face our local robotics companies. So my view of why this is important for our robotics and robotics related technology companies is that, we are here to give them a voice. And if they value that, then I would encourage them to consider becoming members, partnering with us, and looking at collaboration opportunities.
Thank you very much for your time today, Sue.
Thank you, Nicci.